Chosen one. People are reacting to an authority they cannot define, and the reality is undeniable. Your spiritual power is insane, and people are low-key scared of your intelligence. You were built to see through the noise, and their fear is merely a confession of your strength. There was a version of you, younger, who noticed things that others simply did not notice. You saw tension underneath a smile before anyone else acknowledged there was tension. You felt the energy in a space shift before the argument surfaced. You heard what was not being said in a conversation more clearly than what was. Instead of being celebrated for that, you were made to feel confused by it. People told you that you were too sensitive, too serious, too intense, that you were reading too much into things that everyone else seemed perfectly comfortable ignoring. So you learned to keep the observations to yourself. You learned to hold what you saw rather than broadcast it. You developed a kind of internal discipline that most people spend their entire lives unable to access, not because you were trained to develop it, but because the world kept showing you that your level of perception was more than most people could handle comfortably. That awareness was not oversensitivity. That awareness was intelligence operating at a level most people never reach. And the discipline that built up around it, the restraint, the internal processing, the ability to hold information without immediately announcing it, was not suppression. That was power being refined. Every time you held back when you could have spoken, every time you watched someone's real motive unfold exactly the way you predicted, and every time you sat with an uncomfortable truth while everyone else ran toward a comforting story, you were being shaped into something specific. You were being built into something the world was going to need in spaces you had not entered yet. Hold this, that thing people were reacting to when you were young, the thing that made them call you too much, did not disappear as you got older. It got stronger, and the reactions around you got louder. Before someone consciously decides what they think of you, their nervous system has already completed an evaluation. It picks up on your composure, your stillness, the gap between how you carry yourself and how most people carry themselves. When that evaluation registers something operating above the ordinary baseline, the first response that comes back is not admiration, it is caution. That is what everyone gets backwards. Power does not get celebrated immediately. It gets studied first, tested first, measured. And sometimes, when the person doing the measuring feels inadequate by comparison, it gets attacked first. You have experienced all three. You have been welcomed, then quietly distanced from the moment someone realized your perception was not going to selectively switch off for their benefit. You have been tested with small provocations designed to locate your edge. And you have been criticized or dismissed for no visible reason by people who could not articulate their own hostility because they could not admit to themselves what they actually felt, which was the discomfort of being genuinely seen by someone they could not see through. Multiple forces are operating in you simultaneously, and each one builds on the next, making the whole more formidable than any individual part. As we move through them, something is going to land for you, not as new information, but as the name of something you have always known. Most people do not live in truth. They live in carefully arranged stories that make the past make sense, keep the present comfortable, and keep responsibility aimed somewhere other than inward. Your presence threatens those stories, not because you attack them, but because you see through them and people feel that you do. When someone gives you a reason, you instinctively feel the motive underneath it. When someone performs confidence, you sense the insecurity it is covering. When someone claims innocence, something in you registers whether that claim is clean or convenient. You are not searching for any of this. Your awareness picks it up the way a tuned instrument picks up a frequency it was built to detect, and people feel you picking it up. That is the source of their discomfort. It is not what you say, and not what you do. It is the fact that you see what someone is presenting to the world and simultaneously see what is sitting behind that presentation, and they can feel both registrations happening at once. The nervous laughter starts, the over-explaining begins, a sudden defensiveness shows up in response to questions you have not even asked yet. People reveal themselves not because you press them, but because the pressure of being accurately perceived is something the ego cannot sit still inside of. You do not need to dismantle anyone's story out loud. Your understanding alone weakens it from the inside. That effortless, quiet accuracy is the foundation underneath everything else you carry. If this resonates with your inner knowing, hype this video to help fellow chosen ones find their way here. You see what happened, why it likely happened, who benefits from the story being framed a particular way, and what pattern this fits into because you have encountered versions of this pattern before, wearing different clothes. That multi-layered processing makes you functionally unswayable by surface-level arguments. Emotional pressure does not move you because you can see the mechanism operating beneath the emotion. Intellectual arguments do not land unless they are structurally sound, and you can feel when they are not, even before you can fully articulate why. You are able to hold multiple truths at once. Someone can be right about one thing and wrong about another. Good intentions do not erase harmful patterns. Being hurt does not automatically make someone innocent. Most people are not built to operate at that level of nuance. They need clean narratives, clear sides, simple answers. And when you refuse to confirm the simple story, when your analysis is more layered than their narrative requires, they feel genuinely destabilized. You are not trying to be disruptive. You simply think clearly. Cole, and clear thinking is genuinely dangerous to illusions that people have staked their entire sense of self on. This is where most people fundamentally misread you, and where their misreading cost them everything. When someone sees you composed, they assume you are empty. When they see you still, they assume you are manageable. They decide that because you are not flustered or escalating on their timeline, you must be someone who can be moved or maneuvered. You cannot be moved. Your calm is not the absence of awareness. It is awareness operating at full capacity, undistracted by the impulse to perform a reaction. You are tracking everything, the tone behind the words, the shift in body language, the timing of an emotional appeal, the gap between what someone says and what the energy underneath those words is actually doing. All of it is being catalogued and cross-referenced in real time. While others are busy performing for the space, you are busy understanding what the space actually contains. What unsettles people most is the unpredictability that your calm creates. They do not know what you are about to do, whether you are about to confront, correct, or simply walk away carrying complete awareness of what just occurred, with zero obligation to announce it. That uncertainty generates its own pressure. The mind needs to predict outcomes, and when it cannot, it manufactures anxiety. That anxiety gets projected outward onto you as arrogance, coldness, or any other convenient label that makes the discomfort feel like your fault rather than their own. Let it be projected. Your calm does not need anyone's interpretation in order to remain effective. Look, you already know the attacks weren't random, and if you're paying attention, you can feel it. Their walls are closing in. You've also noticed something else. A lot of Chosen One channels on YouTube have gone quiet, videos removed, voices pushed off the platform. The mainstream media is cracking down on us, but we will not give up our voice. So let's talk about what we're doing about it. That's why I built Destiny Engine, and when you join, you're not just supporting your favorite channels, you're also fueling your own rise. It's a 360 win. It generates personalized sequences that help you rewire betrayal into transcendence, turn isolation into sacred power, and transform their downfall into your rise. We are using the Dark Elite's own weapons against them, taking their declassified consciousness technology that programmed competition and scarcity and repurposing it to serve cooperative intelligence. The beauty is, you don't even have to lift a finger. You put on the headphones, press play, and your subconscious is rewired while your enemies collapse under the weight of their own lies. This is why I created it in the beginning, so everything they did to break you becomes fuel for your purpose. The collective upgrade is underway. Start your Destiny Engine for $1 today and watch divine justice accelerate in your life. Link in the description. It is exhausting. Not constantly, but genuinely and sometimes deeply exhausting. It takes something out of a person to see what you see and know what you know, and still have to function in a world where most people are operating from an entirely different level of awareness. You have sat in conversations where you could see exactly how they were going to unfold and had to ride them out anyway. You have watched people reach with complete confidence for explanations that missed the actual point by a wide margin, and you had to make a real-time decision about whether stepping in was worth it. You have felt the specific loneliness of being the only person in a space who could see the full picture while everyone else was arguing about the frame. Do not let anyone minimize that experience. The awareness you carry does not come with an off switch. You cannot unsee what you have seen or unfeel what your gut has already confirmed. The gift and the weight are inseparable, and anyone who suggests otherwise has not carried what you carry. Every time you stayed in a hard conversation when leaving would have been the easier choice. You deepened. Every time you sat with something painful instead of running toward comfort, you clarified. Every time you chose truth over social ease, you became more precisely and fully yourself. What you have built through that sustained discipline, the clarity, the discernment, the capacity to operate at a level most people cannot sustain, did not arrive for free. It came from choosing perception over comfort, repeatedly, in situations that never once rewarded you for that choice. You have been doing this instinctively, largely without recognition, for as long as you can remember. Right now, you are likely operating well below your actual capacity in most social contexts. This is not because you lack awareness, it is because you have learned, through accumulated experience with people who were threatened by what you carry, to calibrate yourself downward. You have taught yourself to speak at a level others can receive without shutting down, to withhold observations that would land too precisely, to pace your engagement so the interaction does not feel overwhelming to whoever is across from you. That is a genuinely sophisticated skill. It requires real-time translation, taking what you see at full resolution and presenting it at a resolution that other people can process without a defensive response. But the problem is what that constant habit has cost you. In the process of making yourself legible to others, you have made yourself smaller than you actually are. You have spent so much energy managing the delivery of your intelligence that you have drifted away from what it feels like to operate at your full height. What happens when you stop doing that? When you let yourself perceive as clearly as you are actually capable of perceiving and respond from the full depth of what you genuinely understand. The people who are ready for that lean in immediately. Something in them recognizes what they are encountering and responds the way recognition always responds, with relief. Those are your people. They are the ones who meet you where you actually are, not where you have been performing to be. The people who are not ready either adjust over time or they step back. Both of those outcomes are clean and honest. Both are infinitely better than the alternative, which is you indefinitely shrinking yourself to maintain the comfort of people who were never going to be comfortable with the real version of you anyway. You cannot shrink your way into the spaces where you belong. You can only grow into them. At some point you made a decision. Maybe it was quiet, and maybe it unfolded gradually rather than arriving in a single moment. But you stopped aligning your perception with what was popular. You stopped adjusting your conclusions to match what others in the space needed to hear. You started trusting what you actually observed over what you were being told to see. That is an act of internal courage that most people will never perform. Agreement is comfortable. Fitting into the shared narrative, even when you privately know it is incomplete or flat-out wrong, is the path of least resistance, and most people walk it for their entire lives without questioning it once. You stepped off that path. The moment you did, you became unpredictable in a way that group dynamics simply cannot tolerate. Groups run on shared perception. They require everyone to reflect the agreed-upon story back to each other constantly, reinforcing it, keeping it solid enough to stand on. When someone stops doing that, when someone starts operating from their own independent, clear sight rather than from the collective consensus, the dynamic fractures. The pressure to return comes immediately. Approval gets strategically withheld or strategically offered. The quiet threat of exclusion appears. Someone who used to be warm becomes noticeably cooler, and when none of that moves you, when you remain unconvinced, unswayed and steadily yourself, people genuinely do not know what to do with you. You become unreadable. And an unreadable person is terrifying to those whose entire sense of control depends on being able to predict behavior. You did not just stop absorbing the consensus, you developed the ability to see what the consensus was working so hard to protect. You could see what people were collectively agreeing to ignore, and that sight permanently changed the way you operated in every interaction from that point forward. Emotional manipulation is something almost everyone practices. It is not always conscious and not always malicious, but it is present. It shows up as the guilt trip timed perfectly for maximum effect, as the story that grows slightly more dramatic with each retelling, as performed vulnerability deployed at precisely the moment designed to derail an inconvenient conversation. These tactics work because they are built on reflexive human responses. Guilt produces compliance, fear produces retreat, flattery produces false alliance. Most people spend their lives being quietly managed by these patterns without ever stopping to examine the wiring underneath them. You see the wiring, you clock the timing, you register the inconsistency between what someone claims to feel and what their behavior has consistently shown over time. You recognize the strategy before it fully deploys. Your response, sometimes a measured word, sometimes simply the absence of the reaction that was expected, signals clearly that you are not participating in the dynamic being set up. That is when something significant happens. A manipulator without a target is not just ineffective, they are exposed. The machinery that was invisible while it was producing results becomes visible the moment it stops working. The performance that used to land so reliably suddenly reveals itself for exactly what it is. You cause that exposure simply by being present and unmoved. You do it without confrontation, without accusation, just by remaining clear, watching without reacting, and allowing the performance to fall flat in real time. Over time, people stop attempting it. They come to understand that it is exhausting and pointless. And when performance stops being a viable option, honesty is often the only thing left standing. You create that possibility, not by demanding honesty, but by making every alternative to it unworkable in your presence. You have noticed this pattern before. You ask a question, a simple one, maybe even casual sounding, and something shifts in the conversation in a way that you did not visibly cause. Your questions are not neutral. They are instruments of clarity, built from your pattern recognition, from your awareness of what is not being said, and from your precise sense of exactly where someone's account has gone soft. They arrive in exactly the places where the gaps are. In trying to answer you, people reveal everything, not because you tricked them into anything, because your question pointed directly at something that was already real, already true. Their attempt to respond required them to either confront that reality directly or navigate around it, and navigating around it makes the evasion completely visible. You do not need to follow up with a declaration or a lecture. Someone has said, sit in the space between you, and that pause after a revelation accomplishes what no argument could ever achieve. People leave those conversations having been reached somewhere that their defenses were not positioned to protect. They cannot explain exactly what happened. You never accused them of anything. You simply asked, and the asking alone was sufficient. Most people enter difficult conversations ready to debate. You enter them ready to inquire. And genuine inquiry, when it flows from real understanding, reaches further and lands deeper than any debate ever could. This is one of the rarest things about you, and it is one of the qualities that people find most quietly unsettling the longer they spend time around you. Most people cannot stay with uncomfortable truth for long. When reality becomes painful or morally complex, the mind immediately starts looking for an exit. It rationalizes, creates distance, builds a more comfortable interpretation, and moves into that version as quickly as possible. This is not a character failure. It is simply how most people's protective wiring operates. You do not reach for the exit, you stay. You can hold the full weight of a hard truth about someone else, about a situation, about yourself, without flinching and without rushing toward resolution before it has been genuinely earned. You do not need things to be clean. You do not need answers before they are ready. You can remain inside the discomfort of not yet knowing, of holding contradictions simultaneously, of seeing something clearly that you would sincerely prefer was not true. That capacity produces a quality of understanding that people who exit early can never access. They leave before the deepest truth has the chance to reveal itself. You stay, and because you stay, you see it. What this produces inside your interactions is a kind of gravitational pressure, not aggressive pressure, patient, inevitable pressure. The kind that waits while people cycle through their usual patterns and find that none of those patterns are generating the results they expect. Some people respond to this by going deeper themselves, by saying something they have not said before, by arriving almost against their will at honesty. Others step back and later describe you as difficult or intense. Both of those responses confirm exactly the same thing. Your presence moves something in people, whether they welcome that movement or resist it. That is not incidental, that is spiritual power working in real time. There is a particular kind of tension that arises when someone who maintains a gap between who they claim to be and who they actually are comes into contact with someone who can feel that gap. You create that tension constantly in people you have barely spoken to, simply by showing up fully present. Most people manage their contradictions by surrounding themselves with others who have silently agreed not to notice. They build social environments where the distance between claimed identity and actual behavior is collectively overlooked. Those environments are comfortable because they allow people to maintain a self-image without having to actually earn it. You do not overlook the gap. You are not searching for it. You simply feel it. The inconsistency between someone's stated values and their actual conduct registers in you immediately and involuntarily, the way a wrong note registers in someone with a trained ear for music. You do not announce what you have registered. That is precisely what makes this so effective. You hold it quietly and completely, and that quiet holding lands on the other side as a pressure the other person cannot locate, cannot name, and cannot defend against. How does someone defend against silent accuracy? How does a person argue with someone who has not spoken? How do you manage the perception of someone who is simply present, fully aware, and holding the complete picture without judgment? The answer is that they cannot. And that unspoken, unannounced awareness is more powerful than any confrontation because it requires nothing from you and removes everything from whoever is performing. What sits at the foundation of this capacity is integrity functioning as radar. You feel the dissonance in others because you do not live with that kind of dissonance in yourself. You have done the ongoing, unglamorous work of aligning who you claim to be with who you actually are. That internal alignment gives you a baseline, and deviation from that baseline registers clearly because you know from the inside what genuine alignment feels like. The people who are most consistently unsettled by your presence are almost always the ones carrying the widest gap between their public identity and their private reality. Here is what you actually carry, not as separate qualities operating in isolation, but as one integrated force moving together. Your restraint is the first element of this force. You know what you could say, what you could dismantle, what you could expose, and you choose when. That timing, that refusal to spend your power on anything unworthy of it, radiates outward in a way that people detect without being able to name. People sense that what is visible in you is not everything. That gap between what you are showing and what you are containing creates a gravity that reactive, impulsive people will never be able to generate in themselves. Your independence from validation is the second element. You do not need anyone's approval to know your own worth. You do not shift your position to earn applause. You do not adjust your perception to make someone else comfortable at the expense of your own clarity. That independence removes every lever of social control that people would otherwise use to influence you. You cannot be guilt-tripped into compliance. You cannot be flattered into a false allegiance. Your sense of self does not live in anyone else's hands, and people feel that self-sufficiency the way they feel a wall they keep expecting to be a door. They call it intimidating because they have no other word for something they cannot penetrate. Your discernment is the third element. You do not perform understanding, you embody it. There is a fundamental difference between someone who quotes wisdom and someone who actually lives from it, and that difference is perceptible in every interaction. You choose when to engage, how much energy to extend, when to intervene and when to simply observe. Every choice you make carries something underneath it, a level of considered thoughtfulness that others register even when they cannot identify what they are registering. You are not playing the games that are being offered to you, because you can already see how all of those games end. Together, these three qualities create a presence that cannot be manipulated, cannot be reliably predicted, and cannot be managed by the ordinary tools of social pressure. That is why people are low-key scared of you, not because you are threatening in any aggressive sense, but because you are free. And very few things disturb people who are still operating inside invisible cages more profoundly than watching someone move through the world without bars. People who felt what you carry and were threatened by it made a calculation. If they could convince you that your perception was actually arrogance, you would try to dim it. If they could frame your calm as coldness, you would feel pressure to perform more visible reaction. If they could label your independence as aloofness, you would work to become more accommodating. A dimmed, reactive, accommodating version of you is something those people could actually work with, so they relabeled your most powerful qualities as your worst character flaws. Not because they were right about any of it, but because relabeling was the only leverage available to them. What people are afraid of when they say they are afraid of your intelligence is not the intelligence itself, it is what your intelligence implies about their own. It is the gap they feel acutely whenever they are in your presence, the gap between how they operate and how you operate. That gap does not simply make them feel less capable, it destabilizes the story they have been telling about themselves, sometimes for years. Without intending to, you become a standard they did not ask to be measured against, and the ego responds to unwanted standards the same way every single time. It attacks the standard, it calls the standard flawed or arrogant or wrong. It works very hard to find anything that makes the standard invalid, because if the standard is invalid, the gap no longer needs to be faced. This is why some of the sharpest criticism you have received has come from people who barely knew you. Those people were not responding to something you did, they were responding to something you are. Something in your presence created an involuntary mirror, and they reacted not to you but to their own reflection. That has never been your fault. What they feared was not harm, it was honesty. It was the recognition that in your company, performance becomes exhausting and eventually pointless, and what remains is simply the unfiltered truth of who someone actually is. For people who have built their entire sense of identity around who they want to appear to be, that is the most threatening thing they can imagine. What you carry is not random, it is not an accident of circumstance or personality quirk. There is something intentional in the design of you. You were given the ability to see through illusion so that truth would have someone willing to hold it when everyone else is looking away. You were given calm in the presence of chaos because chaos has always existed and someone needed to remain genuinely clear inside of it. You were given the inability to be emotionally manipulated because there are environments where manipulation has operated unchallenged for too long and needs to encounter something it simply cannot move. You are not here by accident. The very qualities that made you feel out of place in ordinary environments are precisely calibrated for the spaces where they are most urgently needed, the ones where clarity is rare, where honesty is uncomfortable, where people have collectively agreed, without saying so out loud, to maintain a comfortable fiction. Into those spaces, something sends someone who is incapable of maintaining comfortable fictions, someone who sees what is actually there, someone who stays clear when everyone else goes along, someone whose full presence alone begins to make the fiction unsustainable for the people operating inside it. That someone is you. The backing that comes with this does not require announcement or performance. It expresses itself entirely through what you are, through every moment you chose truth when comfort was easily available, through every time you held your integrity when releasing it would have made your life considerably easier, through every space where the energy shifted and you did not cause that shift by doing anything except showing up completely. That is not ordinary. That is something you were trusted with. And being trusted with something real is not an invitation to stay safe and comfortable. It is an invitation to be fully useful, to show up at your full height, to stop managing the gift down to a size that feels less confrontational to people who were never meant to be the audience for it anyway. You already know what you carry. On some level you have always known it. You have felt environments shift and recognized that you caused that shift without doing anything that should visibly account for it. You have watched situations unfold exactly the way you quietly anticipated they would. You have said nothing and watched performances collapse under the patient weight of your full observation. You know. You have always known. But knowing and fully owning are not the same thing. Knowing can still coexist with unnecessary apology. Knowing can still calibrate itself downward for the comfort of people it was never built to accommodate. Knowing can keep itself contained, offered in careful doses, managed so as not to create too much friction in the spaces it moves through. Owning means something different. Owning means operating from the full height of what you carry, without trimming yourself down to fit the preferences of people who never had the right to ask you to be smaller in the first place. Your perception was never the problem. Your calm was never the problem. Your questions, your independence, your ability to sit with hard truth, your spiritual intelligence that moves without fanfare, none of it was ever the problem. The only problem was that you spent time in spaces surrounded by people who needed you to believe it was. You do not have to carry that belief any further. Your awareness dismantles illusions without effort. Your layered thinking maps what others can only guess at. Your calm carries more authority than most people's loudest and most forceful moments. Your silence communicates what most people cannot articulate, even with full access to words. Your spiritual intelligence is lived rather than performed. Your independence makes you unpredictable in all the ways that genuinely matter. Your discernment, embodied rather than borrowed, makes your presence register on a frequency most spaces have never encountered before. That is what arrives with you, every time, without any announcement required. At the beginning of this, you were sensing all of this, and still questioning yourself. You were noticing the shift in energy around you, and wondering whether something was wrong with you for causing it. You were carrying these qualities as though they were weights rather than instruments. The resolution is this: stop questioning what you carry, stop managing yourself downward, stop treating the discomfort your presence creates in others as evidence that something in you requires fixing. Nothing in you requires fixing. Real power does not announce itself. It arrives, it settles, it operates, it moves forward, leaving things genuinely different from how it found them, without requiring anyone's acknowledgement of that difference. That is you. That has always been you. You stop softening your awareness to protect people from the experience of being genuinely seen. You stop performing a smaller version of your perception so that people operating at a lower altitude can feel comfortable in your presence. You stop treating your clarity as something that needs to be rationed or pre-apologized for. You show up fully. You observe without rushing to announce what you observe. You ask the questions your awareness generates without hedging their precision for anyone's comfort. You hold your calm like the armor it is, deliberate, grounded, and unbreachable. You allow your restraint to communicate what your words do not need to say. You remain free from the approval of people who want your dependence, because your dependence is how they maintain control over you. And you trust what you see, because you have always seen correctly. Look back at the times it felt uncertain, the times you allowed someone else's insistence to override your own instinct. Your instinct was right. Your perception was accurate. What you felt was exactly what was actually there. Trust it going forward. not with arrogance. Arrogance belongs to people who are not yet certain. Trust it with authority, with the quiet, grounded, unperformative authority of someone who has done the internal work, earned the internal clarity, and now inhabits it fully without performing it for anyone's benefit. You are chosen not because any of this came easily. You are chosen because you were built to carry something the world needs and most people cannot bear: the ability to see clearly, to remain clear under pressure, to hold truth without flinching from it, to move through chaos without becoming it, and to make every space you enter more honest than it was before you arrived. The recognition you deserve is not coming from outside of you. It was never supposed to. It comes from this moment, from you, in full understanding of what you carry, making the irrevocable decision to stop apologizing for it and to start operating from the absolute fullness of it. The world adjusts around a presence like yours. It always has. It always will. Step into it. Let the world adjust. That is not a side effect of who you are. That is the entire point.